special thank you to everyone here at the school. Principal Matthew O'Toole has been amazing, and Mr. Jennings is up there in the booth. He's been wonderful too. And we have some volunteers from Northumberland Regional High. Abigail and Megan are students. And Julie is the staff advisor for the Respect Committee. And Julie asked if I would mention the Jack Summit that is coming up in Toronto. It is the first weekend of March and applications are now open. So if you have a young person in your life between the ages of 15 and 24 who would like to be more involved in fighting the stigma surrounding mental illness, then you should absolutely search out the Jack Summit online, because they're looking for young people to help spread the word and to raise awareness about mental illness. So I wanted to get started by just telling you a little bit about the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia. For those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we basically exist for two reasons: to raise funds to support mental health programming across the province and to raise awareness. And tonight's event, of course, is all about raising awareness. And we're very happy to have the support of two sponsors, the Department of Justice and Lawton's Drugs, and it's because of them that this is a free event. So thank you very much to our sponsors. Also like to say thank you to the members of my team who are here. Martha Tuff is with us. She is our Fund Development and Donor Relations Lead. Colleen Fraser is our Communications Coordinator, and Kara Quigley is our new Administrative Coordinator. They're in the front, so if you have any questions, please feel free to connect with us. And without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to our first speaker. Dr. Alexa Bagnell is a true friend to the Foundation. She is currently the Interim Chief of Psychiatry for Child and Adolescents at the IWK Health Center. She just won an award on Friday, but she said, you don't need to mention that. And she said, just keep my intro short. Nobody likes a long introduction. Look, she's pulling me off the stage. But please join me in welcoming Alexa to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it is my pleasure to be here, and this is a great event, and wonderful that the Foundation is going around the province and raising awareness and bringing people out to talk about mental health. My job is working at the IWK in mental health, and I do a lot of work in general psychiatry for children and adolescents up to the age of 19, and I also have a specific clinic in obsessive compulsive disorder. And most of my other work is I have three very active teen boys, well, 16, 14, and 12, but the 12-year-old really thinks he's a teenager. And I have to use all my skills every day, and many times I forget to use them and say, ooh, that is not what I would have recommended to do right there. So I have a very busy and fun life, but I also recognize a lot of the challenges that happen as a parent. And I also live in a family that has been impacted by mental illness. And I can say, we know the stats, 1 in 5. I would say it's very rare that you would find a person that can say they have not had some close connection, either themselves or with someone close to them who's had a mental illness. And I think when I hear people, it's never happened in our family, I don't know anyone with it, then you're not talking about it, because the statistics are there. We know many people suffer in silence. And what I'm hoping in this talk is you can learn a little bit about the onset of mental illness, what happens with brain development. We're going to talk about some of the common mental illnesses that we see, and then some of the things that we do to help in treatment that will hopefully give you hope and be able to give that to other people. And also what you can do to help. How can you reduce stigma? What are some of the myths around mental illness? And how can you take care of your own mental health? So I'm going to do that all in 25 minutes. How do you think? I'm like really fast talker. So we're going to start with the brain. Maybe not. Oh, obviously I get really clicker happy, and then we're going to fly through the slides really fast. So this is the brain, and I'm going to turn this way just so you can know that the top picture is really the brain from the side. If you were to take the flap off my skull, that's a very medical term, but if you look at the brain in terms of development from 5 to about 20, the green is what we'll call underdeveloped brain, but it is a lot of connections, but they're not, we call it pruned. It's a very horrible term that needs to be, but pruning is actually the fine-tuning of the brain in development so that it basically the use it or lose it principle, which is the parts that you really need, you keep, the parts that aren't so important start to die off. And the pruning is the blue, so that is the finely tuned part of the brain. And as you can see, the brain develops from 5 to 20, and we now know it's about 24. There was a joke earlier whether the male or female brain actually develops at the same rate. All the females in the room will have their own internal dialogue on that, but it is around 24 that the brain fully develops. And the interesting thing, I can hear some mumblings, the interesting thing about brain development is it goes back to front. And the important part of that is the very front of our brain is actually our emotion regulation. We call it the CEO of the brain, so it organizes things, it helps us with impulse control. When you're really upset and angry and you want to send that email or that text, it actually tells you this might not be the time to send that control part. That really isn't fully developed till you're about 24. So when I do this talk, and I've actually been at this high school does phenomenal work in its youth programming in school around mental health, and I've been here a couple times over the years. Teens sometimes say, that's it, that's the reason, it's not my fault. No, I'm not saying that. You still can operate your brain, but you might have to work a bit harder, and things like alcohol and drugs can make it even harder. And if you're overwhelmed with stress or emotion, that front part of the brain is not as finely tuned, so it might be more difficult. So those are the things to keep in mind with brain development. But it brings us to the next, which is just how common anxiety disorders are in kids. So anxiety would be the number one. These are Canadian statistics, and they're up to the age of 17, so 4 to 17. So 7% of kids, and we think it's about 1 in 10 adults, but about 7% of kids will have an anxiety disorder. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is about 5%. Conduct disorder, so disruptive behavior, is about 4%. Mood disorders, primarily depression, is 4%. Substance use disorders, 1%. Any disorder, about 14%. And this is the 4 to 17. And this would be the most, I would say, conservative estimate of percentage. And I like to bring it up because this is a fairly old study. We often use the 1 in 5. These are true, very functionally impairing disorders that they did. So it makes me realize we have some serious illness out there. And we know how many kids are actually coming to seek help with us, and it doesn't even come close to this number. There's many more people out there that we're not reaching and that we don't see. And this is just to give you an idea of the onset. So the dark colored, they should seem red. Do they look red to you guys from there? Anyway, the reddish people or the dark people in the picture are showing the age of onset. So at 14, about 50% of mental illnesses have started. And by the mid-20s, about 75% of people have experienced their first episode in their life. So it really often is a young age onset for the first episode of an illness, and it can really impact the trajectory of a person because it's such an important stage in development and independence in terms of school and employment. And this is just for the median age of onset of most disorders. So for any disorder, it's about 14. Anxiety disorder, it's 11. We know kids' anxiety disorders start quite young, and they can occur throughout the lifespan, but many people have had anxiety for many, many years before they seek help. Mood disorders, the average is around 30, 18 to 43 being the range, and impulse control disorders younger, so 11. Substance use disorders is around 20. So just knowing those statistics, I think it helps to know it's fairly young age onset. That doesn't mean that you can't have sort of wellness and then develop an illness as an adult, but we know that a lot of people are impacted 3/4 by their mid-20s. There's a lot of myths out there about mental illness, so I thought I would do some of these. I'm going to do this in a pictorial format. So start with this. So I was going to get you to guess what the myth is around this, but I'm thinking that's going to be like read my mind, so I'm not going to do that to you. But this is, you should be able to overcome mental illness with willpower. That is a huge myth out there. Be stronger, work harder, you should be happy, you should feel good. You know, there's a lot of people worse off than you is another thing people say. You know, that's not something to worry about. You shouldn't be anxious about that. All sorts of things that people say in the, you should be giving them the message, it's something wrong with you in terms of you're not strong enough, you're not good enough. So you should be able to will your way out of it. Yet we know it's a brain-based illness, like any other medical illness, and we wouldn't tell someone, you need to get your pancreas to pump out more insulin, and you need to do it right now. We would never do that, right, to someone with diabetes, but somehow we can say, you just need to work harder to someone who has a mental illness. And it really, really, really makes people feel even worse, even more or less likely to seek help, more down about themselves. This is, mental health terms are not adjectives. So he's not so schizo, or that's so bipolar, or emo is the big word right now in teens. Actually, my son told me that emo is totally out and I need to stop saying it because no one uses that anymore, but I still do use it. I say that's a horrible term. My OCD, I'm just looking at some of the other ones, but people use mental illness terms to describe or even to label people. So it's not a person with diabetes, it's he's schizophrenic, or that person, I'll think of another one in a second, but he's depressed. Instead of, that's John, he's a plumber, he suffers from depression, right? It's very different. If you get labeled and identified by your illness, it changes how you think about yourself, but it also changes whether you're going to actually think about getting help. Is this something that actually is treatable and could change? It's not my identity. The next one is, and this is very common in child and adolescent psychiatry, so this says, nobody puts baby in a corner. I figured there might be some Dirty Dancing fans here, I have no idea. This is somebody does. So this is that the parents are somehow to blame for mental illness. It's very, very common in society, and it really hurts. Parents already have enough guilt when their child's ill for any reason, let alone around a mental illness, and it really impacts when they are actually seeking help and their ability to do things to help their kid when they feel already that they're being blamed for whatever is going on with their child. So it's a really strong and pervasive myth currently in our culture. And this one is that the only way to treat a mental illness is with pills. It's a very striking photo. And being a psychiatrist, I will tell you, yes, we absolutely use medications and they can change people's lives. So I am not against medications. I use them every day. I use them very cautiously and carefully, and I use them in conjunction with other treatments because it's looking after, treating mental illness is treating a whole person, and there are many parts to it. Medications can be one of them. So those are just 4 myths, but they all get in the way often of people seeking help. When we know what causes mental illness, or at least I said when I went to medical school, a lot of people didn't go into psychiatry because they didn't think it was for real doctors. And so why would you do that? And I think it's the most fascinating field because it's all brain-based and there's so much we're learning every day. When I was asked, I have to go back to our wonderful musician, because when I was asked, what would you have done if you hadn't been a doctor? I definitely would have been a singer. There are only a few things about that would be a problem. I can't sing, I'm tone deaf, and I have absolutely no music ability, but I love singing, like I would. And when I was in choirs, and I sang in choirs all my life till they finally said, you're done, you're no more singing in choirs. They did tell me that actually I do not need to sing, and I'm sure this has never been told to anyone in the choir, as loud as I was singing in the choir. They actually told me that. So that would tell you about my singing ability. So we know in terms of what caused mental illness that it is genetic. It definitely has a genetic component, but there are many factors that contribute. So environmental, things that happen in development, stressors in our life, illnesses that happen in our lives. So it is very complicated, and definitely you can never say there is one thing, although genetics is our biggest risk factor for almost all illnesses. So medical, psychiatric, any kind of illness, our genes really do make a difference in terms of what we're most vulnerable for. I really want to stay on this slide for a while, so I want you can all see it. Do you think you could forward the slide one more? Because this is a really good, thank you, that's awesome. Okay, so these are some of the treatments that we use, and just so you know, there's medication at the bottom. But we always think about family and support. Mental illness really affects a family. It really impacts how family functions and all members of the family. So we're often thinking of how can we support a family to best support their loved one who's suffering from mental illness. Lifestyle adjustments, sometimes when people have had a mental illness for a long time, that actually change how they live, what they think they're capable of, and their independence. And there's a lot of skills that they need to then develop that they may have not developed along the way. And the other is psychosocial rehabilitation and therapy. So one of the things that can happen is that we pattern ourselves as human beings based on our experiences and what we keep doing. And when you have an illness for a while, you actually change how you think about things, how you approach things. And there are ways in therapy to actually reprogram your brain. I know it sounds very robot-like, but it's not true. It just changes some of the patterns of how we approach a situation and what we think we're capable of. And one of the examples is an anxiety, and I will talk about that, how that therapy works. So we're going to go one more. And we're going to watch a video on anxiety just to kind of introduce it. It is an area that I work a lot in, so it's probably near and dear to my heart. But I think this, some of you may have seen this video before, but it's from Australia, and they've done quite a great media campaign around understanding mental illness.